you can be a waste-busting resource of Gwinnett Clean and Beautiful and encourage others to do the same. Learn how at gwinnettcb.org. Thanks to you, a better tomorrow begins today.
Welcome back. Alan, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what the difference is with mental illness?
Well, first let me say that mental illnesses are all biological illnesses of the brain, not unlike illnesses of any other organ in the body, like diabetes is an illness of the pancreas, or heart disease, an illness of the heart, and they're all treatable.
Are you born with mental illness? Do you catch it when you get older? Or
there is some family tendencies and some inherited traits, and then social situations cause some pressure on that too.
Okay.
And increase the situation.
But they show up at various points in different times in different people's lives.
Absolutely.
There's triggers. Now, I knew a guy in school that overdosed on acid, of all things, and after he recovered, he was a schizophrenic. He was paranoid schizophrenic, and apparently it damaged his brain, and that was the result.
What is a paranoid schizophrenic?
Paranoid schizophrenic is a person who has delusions. The illness manifests itself in delusions,
so they see things, hear things?
They see things, they hear things. They can think that people are out to get them, family members are out to harm them.
The people I've dealt with, to me, it almost seems like they're awake, but yet they're dreaming or something.
It's very much like a dreamlike state for them. The things that they imagine, that they see and hear, they almost feel like they're stunned when they can't understand why people around them don't see and hear the same things. It's very, very real for them.
And a lot of people, I think, who have paranoia isolate themselves because they fear people so
They do.
greatly. They often will hibernate within their own home, and that, of course, causes problems at the home. And when they're in larger social gatherings, they have a lot of trouble with those
Absolutely.
relationships.
I guess that's the paranoia part of it.
Absolutely.
So they're not likely to be violent towards others, mainly towards themselves.
No, they fear others.
Okay.
They're more often than not violent towards themselves because they're so afraid of others, but they hear the voices, they hear the things that bother them internally so much so, and their escape route is to do something to themselves to get themselves out of the situation.
And I would agree with that most of them are nonviolent. Now,
Yes.
however, there are exceptions. We've had 2 deputies in my unit get attacked a couple weeks ago by a schizophrenic we were picking up, and he assaulted both of the deputies, and one of them ended up with a black eye and a bloody lip. And I would say the majority of the time, though, when we pick these folks up, that they're passive and cooperative.
It's important to remember too, though, that mental illness don't always come as a one package deal, a one illness package, I should say. They're often accompanied by another mental illness, and it may be that the secondary mental illness is coming into play is when they're attacking people and stuff like that.
One thing I've heard a lot lately is bipolar disorder.
Bipolar is a disorder that it shows itself in extreme manias, either upbeat manias or really low-level manias.
So highs are high, lows are
Highs
low.
are highs and lows are very low. There's very often not much middle ground. So.
Okay, it seems like a lot of people are claiming that they have bipolar or being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, more so than I've ever heard in the past.
And I think the former name of it was manic depression, and
Right.
so there were a lot of people, I think, who experience bursts of energy, and they would sometimes they pace or they speak very, very rapidly, and they start all sorts of projects, don't complete them, but they feel
Sounds like ADHD.
and there may be some similarities,
Being
but I think it's
depressed in itself is not mental illness, is it?
No, being depressed or depression as a mental illness is a persistent feeling of sadness or whatever the typical sadness,
Yeah.
the extremes, the trouble dealing with daily
I
life.
mean, I would think that most people go through a period of depression in their lives over something.
Well, 1 in 4 people in a given year will deal with a mental disorder of some kind. 1 in 17 deal with a serious mental illness in their lives.
A lot of the depression I think you're referring to is sort of situational, typical after a traumatic event, which would
Yes.
be sort of a normal reaction.
Right.
And I think there are other forms of depression that are much more biologically based, and they're sustained for very long periods of
Right.
time and well beyond what the average person, I guess, would relate to a situational
Right,
event.
and that's when it really gets into a mental illness versus just the everyday pressures of life.
And they become dysfunctional. They don't want to get dressed. They don't want to bathe. They don't want to go and eat food, you know, even if it's prepared for them, certainly not to prepare it themselves. It's different in everybody, but their daily activities are brought to extremely low level.
4 of the top 10 reasons for disability in this country are mental illnesses. The top 10, 4 of them.
Medication often helps.
Medication and psychosocial treatments such as psychotherapy and stuff like that are the keys.
The problem that I see, though, is lack of insurance coverage, lack of funds to obtain the medication, and lack of facilities to get the services.
Absolutely, and the stigma of mental illness, I prefer personally to refer to them as brain disorders because even the words mental illness still bring about the old stigma of movies such as Rain Man or something like that.
Well, you had shared with me earlier that you actually were treated years ago. Can you share that with us now?
Yes, I am a consumer. That is the person we refer to, or that's the name we give to a person with a diagnosis. I was diagnosed in 1990 with bipolar and depression. I've been treated ever since. I've been hospitalized twice. And our former national executive director said one time, and it's a phrase that stuck with us, that treatment works if you can get it. I was fortunate. I had great insurance. I had great support systems in my family and the people that I worked with.
And the medication has helped?
Absolutely.
Changed
Absolutely.
your life?
I was the kind of person who I was an athlete, never took medications, didn't want to, you know, and it was a small hurdle, but a great feeling to know that there was something that would help me, and the hurdle was to accept the fact that I have to be on medication all my life, but that's fine.
Lack of insurance, and I think that is a big issue. A lot of people feel like if they don't have insurance, they don't have resources to do it. But in Gwinnett County, we actually have a board that is responsible for treating mental illness, and it's a sliding scale basis. It's called GRN, which stands for Gwinnett, Rockdale, Newton, and they collectively have a mental health system. And so if you have private insurance, they certainly will tap into that and give you as much as they can under your insurance. If you don't have access to insurance, they are responsible for providing you with treatment, medication, and other services, at no cost to you if you are indeed unable to pay. So I want to make sure that people out there realize that there is a resource for them or their loved one, and that lack of insurance should not be an obstacle.
One thing that we see a lot of times, too, is when people don't take their meds, they may become violent or
I would
hard
say
to handle.
that's the number one problem I hear when people come in for hearings on orders to apprehend, is that their family member, they're not taking their meds, and they're off their meds, and they're out of control. And would you agree with that?
I
or-
think I would definitely say that is a situation. I think what often happens is that people get a positive response to the medication. They are indeed getting better, and then they feel like, well, I don't need it anymore because I am better, and they fail to somehow connect that they are better because they are taking their meds. They stop taking them, and they go back down
Right.
into that other cycle.
Sergeant Lee, let's talk about a recent case in Loganville where a homeowner was shot by a mentally ill neighbor, and then we're going to listen to that 911 call.